Councillor. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to another episode of Media Watch. I'm your host, Dr. Savi. Now, every week we try and bring you some fantastic guests, and this week is another showcase of great talent. I'm sure they're all smiling in the background. I'm going to introduce you to Aman, to Joe, and also to Mukesh. I won't steal their thunder. I'll let them introduce themselves. So, welcome to the show.
Well, it's great to be back here in Media Watch, Dr. Aurora. Of course, having stood for Parliament this general election, I'm delighted to be here.
Yeah, but you're not delighted to be here as a Member of Parliament. You're delighted to be here as part of, hopefully in the future, be another candidate that will be successful, yeah?
Well, I think, God willing, I think we'll make it in the end. But Mission 2020, I hope.
Mission 2020, or before?
Or before. Well, let's hope for a by-election nearby.
Okay, hope so. Joe, good to see you again.
Savi, great to be back on the programme. As you know, I'm a criminal lawyer, I'm a criminal silk, and I'm president of the Society of Asian Lawyers.
Congratulations on being re-elected.
Thank you very much indeed. So I've got a few observations about matters legal today and other things as well.
Fantastic, good to have you with us again.
Hello,
Mukesh, good to see you, how are you?
Good to see you again. It's nice to be invited yet again, so I must be doing something wrong.
Yeah,
but,
saying all the right stuff.
Yeah. But seriously, if your audience don't know me already, I'm a Rotarian, I'm also a local councillor, and I do a lot of work in the community fighting for people's rights.
Fantastic. So, as per normal, what we do is we look at the main news headlines for the week, and then we cover off some other news items. This week we learn about yet another story of people trying to leave the country. 9 members of 3 families related in one sense. I believe they went off to the Hajj and then maybe a wedding or something, and then some reason they didn't come back, and it was all over the news. I must be serious about this. At one point I thought it was we're just staying for an extra few days, and they hadn't actually told anyone. But unfortunately it's more serious than that. Reportings are suggesting that the same family back in March were taken off an aeroplane, and some security checks actually took place. Now, the question that I wanted to ask basically is that obviously this is time and time again, this is a story that comes up, it hits the headlines. You could argue that to a certain extent the media might be kind of Islamophobic, but I don't know if they're making such a big deal out of it. But does it lead to more kind of serious thoughts around grooming, possibly? Is it around the fact that, I had this question in my mind, do they not consider themselves to be British? A bit of a contentious thing here. Are they or are they not British if they're thinking like that? Or what is motivating these people to do that? Or are they getting influenced by other factors?
Well, I think, look, this is a very serious problem in the sense that you've got people that are willing enough to go and live in a faraway land, in a foreign land. With the kids. With the kids. Mm. And it's not as though they're moving to another country and leaving one civilized place and going into another. They're going into a place where murder, deadly violence is a way of life. And I think there is something seriously wrong. But at the same time, of course, you've got, on average, about 5 people that are leaving the UK and going and joining ISIS or going to the Islamic State. We have had about 600 young Muslim men who have, in fact, come back as well over the past year or so. So it is a two-way road. But I think when we see families with children leaving now and moving to such places, I think there has to be a further insight into why they're wanting to go to such dreadful places.
It's interesting you say that about people coming back, and I know we had a quick discussion just before the show started, Joe, about possibly is it fair in terms of the way that people are treated when they do come back, if they are recognised to have been out there. There's obviously a problem here, isn't there? And there's a problem with those people that come back. And there's a possibility that they could be taken through the court and seen to be traitors of the country.
They could be regarded as such, Savi, and there's a fundamental problem in terms of identity. I don't think the fact that people want to go to places like Syria and be part of the ISIS movement necessarily means that they don't regard themselves as British. They may regard themselves as volunteers in some foreign land fighting for a force that has the same religious principles and ideals that they share. The difficulty we have is that people who become attracted to this sort of campaign and the whole movement that ISIS represents are people who have become so disengaged and so disillusioned with life in this country that they don't anymore regard themselves as having signed up to British values, and this is a fundamental problem. So there are push factors, no doubt, because they feel that Britain has turned its back on the international Muslim community. There are pull factors because of the attraction that often young women have to becoming the wives or partners of ISIS fighters. We know that there's a great deal of grooming that takes place, and let's be under no illusion at all. Those men who are involved in the movement for ISIS in Syria and in Iraq are not people who genuinely subscribe to Islamic ideals. We know that what they believe in is a complete aberration of what Islam stands for. Any good, decent Muslim would not align themselves with such people. By and large, what they are imperialists. They are people who are looking to seize land, seize the resources that come with that land, and like many imperialists who go marauding around the globe, they will try and find themselves a wife or seize somebody who can become a partner for them. And I think this is really where it becomes very sinister indeed. You've got 3 women, they're all married, they have between them 9 children.
And their husbands are here, aren't they?
Their husbands are here. I think one of the husbands may have gone back to Pakistan because the marriage broke up for whatever reason. But we're dealing with children who had no say in the decision about taking them to Syria. No say in the decision to have them absorbed within this ISIS movement, of which they'll have next to no understanding. And so therefore there's a responsibility of the British state to intervene in these sorts of situations, because those children are British citizens and they are, after all, to be looked after by our government as well. And so there is a real issue here. If adults want to leave this country, they take upon themselves a huge risk, because if they leave the country and they come back, as we know, Savi, they invariably get prosecuted and then they get punished very severely. There were 2 young British Muslim men who recently got 12.5 years for having gone and fought abroad and then come back. And I think that this is a warning that the British state is sending out to any Muslims, particularly younger ones, whether they're young men or young women, that if you leave these shores and go abroad, don't expect a welcoming party when you come home.
Do you think our local councils and are kind of putting forward investment into youth clubs and that kind of thing? Do you think youth clubs help people feel more connected to you know, where they live? Is that some way of helping, do you think? Or because I've seen a lot of places youth clubs have not had the investment, or maybe it's just down to the fact that people are not interested in getting together, and you know, they're more used to sitting at home playing computer games and blowing each other up through simulations.
Well, I would hesitate in suggesting anything like that, because there have been issues over the past number of years where austerity has made a significant difference to local communities. If there hadn't been investment by the Lotteries Commission or by European grants, some of those locations which you're describing would not have any form of local community activity. The issue around the Britishness, as you put it, is actually thinking about engaging with those young people. If those young people have lost those values, you've got to actually say, what are those values? What do you term as being British?
Yeah,
you know?
I think that's a good question.
And that's important. But
absolutely,
you've asked about community activities. There have been activities taking place where boxing has come in, and we've generated some of the best boxers from grassroots. We've got gymnastics, we've got athletics. It's all happening. But the problem we face is that when you've got situations like shores start being cut back, right? You've got situations where community activities are being cut back, right? Local authorities are actually having to make some very harsh decisions because they are obliged to do it.
So do you think there's a link between?
I believe there certainly is, and if you having recently been up to Manchester and to Liverpool and places like that, there's been huge investments in terms of the EU investing in those locations. You've now got heritage status in some of those locations, right? City, world city as they say for
world
Liverpool.
city or culture or something.
Yeah, for Liverpool. And when I went there, I couldn't believe how much Liverpool had changed. But then has the same investment taking place in the traditional heartland, or where in this country the money was made 50 to 100 years ago?
I would say that maybe we're not as integrated a society as, there's always been that statement about the difference between being integrated versus assimilated, right?
Yeah.
But in terms of an integrated community, maybe we're not, because it's just the very nature of the people that actually live there.
Sylvie, can I make an observation?
I don't mean
about
like,
Mukesh?
if you count on your hands how many white people you know, Chinese people you know,
Well,
Indian people you know, Pakistani people you know.
I have tremendous
you
number.
might have that,
the reason
but-
I have that because I've one, grown up in this country, but the other thing is I've worked in the social circles which allow me to have that.
Yeah, but not
and I've been
everyone.
accepted.
But not everyone, though, right?
No, and I know that when I've stood for election, you know, I've gone round, I've had the dogs chase me, I've had the spit in the face, I've stood near the polling station where I've had a Conservative councillor standing next to me, and there's myself, and someone's gone and said to me, go back home. And I said, what, to Hounslow? Because I live in Hounslow. And the person just can't believe that, one, I'm speaking in English, and then I have the audacity to actually tell them that I live in Hounslow.
I think that Mukesh makes a valid point about the fact that if there is economic austerity and deprivation, it's a breeding ground for extremism. Undoubtedly, we've seen that going back to the Great Depression. That's how Nazism came to exist in the first place. And we know that UKIP has thrived under the last number of years when people are facing great hardship and they look at their neighbours and they think that their darker-skinned neighbours are having it better, perhaps sometimes, or getting preferential treatment with housing, and it simply aggravates young white working-class people. However, I think Mukesh is wrong about something else. There is no correlation between the rise of religious extremism and economic problems in this country under austerity. You have to remember back in the 2000s, 2005 we had the tube bombings.
Right.
Okay, that was under a Labour government when Labour was spending a lot of money on the economy, on the National Health Service and education, etc., etc. One has to understand the roots of extremism. It's not purely to do with economic deprivation. It's often to do with the perception in the Muslim community that internationally they are being treated differently.
A kind of victimization?
And they are being victimized. That's how they feel, whether it's in Palestine or Afghanistan or Iraq or anywhere else. So one has to, as a community, understand that the reasons why a lot of young Muslim people feel alienated from the British state is because they feel that they've been treated as second-class citizens, even when compared to other ethnic groups, whether they're Hindus, Sikhs, or black people. Okay? So there's a real issue here.
I want to bring Aman in here because, to a certain extent, I saw you going, no, you deny the fact that austerity has anything to do with it, and you've just had that supportive statement saying that it doesn't. You know.
Thank you for that, Joe. But no, I disagree with Mr. Councillor Malhotra because I don't think there is any excuse for extremism, for Islamist extremism. I mean, I think one of you mentioned that a lot of white working class people have been voting UKIP for various reasons, but you don't see them going around, you know, creating militias to take down town halls. You know, I think, look, if people are going and joining ISIS, there's a fundamental problem, and that is that they don't consider themselves to be British, number one. Number two, they're failing to integrate with the wider society. I think that is something they have to look within their community and see.
So are we blaming one society versus another one, saying that they're not letting us integrate, or where does that action come from them?
I think a key comparison that can be made is if you look at the predominantly Indian community, the Punjabi community, the Sikh community. Look at how well this community has integrated with wider society.
Has it?
Well, I think it has. I think it absolutely has. It's far more integrated than I would say the Muslim community, unfortunately. You do see a lot more ghettoization in places like Bradford, in places like Dewsbury, up in the north, where you don't see that within the Indian belt, other than south of that.
I think one has to be very careful about making generalizations about different communities. Every ethnic community in this country has its own reactionary elements, fundamentalist elements. You'll find it in the Hindu community, in the Sikh community, and in the Muslim community. I have lots of Muslim friends who have integrated very well into this society, who are fellow professionals as lawyers. They're barristers and solicitors and judges. And so there is an issue, of course, about the fact that parts of the Muslim community feel disenfranchised. And one has to remember, Sabi, that there is a correlation sometimes between your ability to integrate because of your educational standards and your economic advancement, and the fact that you may feel after a while that you haven't made progress, nor has your family, and so you may begin to turn inwards. Now, I have noticed that this phenomenon of turning inwards is beginning to infect a number of communities. I've seen, even within the Hindu community, which was never expected to have a radical edge, some people are beginning to turn inwards. The Sikh community has that too, and of course there are issues within the Sikh community that have fueled a lot of anger to do with, for example, 1984, after Blue Star, and to do with what happened in Delhi in the riots. So there are a lot of reasons why people feel angry. The question is, what do you do with your anger? Do you challenge it into something, channel it rather into something which is positive, by trying to change things within the system, by operating within the system? Or do you go outside the system and turn your back on it and say that I'm not going to engage anymore? This is where the real problem has arisen, particularly with the Muslim community. I think this is why they get such a lot of bad press these days. But I know from Muslim friends of my own that they feel very aggrieved about the fact that the whole community gets tarred with the same brush, in the same way that when we had a problem within the Sikh community, we had differences of opinion over what happened in 1984. A lot of Sikhs felt that, hang on, I'm basically a liberal Sikh, and now I'm getting identified as someone who is fundamentalist.
Well, I think that tends to happen. Now let's move on to another area, and that came in the news recently. Now it's hot on the press. It's about finance. You know, it's political in one sense. Now we've learned about the Greek situation, the central bank. There is a risk that a painful course may be pursued. They may default on their money in terms of what they owe, and they may actually exit the Eurozone and may even actually have their own currency. My quick question was, obviously this may have an impact on the UK economy. Really good if you want to go on holiday because they would need cash, but that's not really the situation here. Does this lead to a wider question of being part of Europe? And we come back to the same idea from before about identity. You know, you don't accept yourself as being British, but do you accept yourself as being European? Okay. Now, you know, you will remember some of the football matches that took place a few years ago when the football was being hosted in particular parts of Europe, and we saw the amount of racism that was there as well. And we see pockets of that. You know, you talk about different communities having extreme thoughts. I mean, there's a movie that came out recently, a French movie, that's looking at the life of skinheads. It has a bit of a story associated with the fact that, you know, it's a point of redemption. And if you look at the gangs that exist there, then there are dangers in other countries as well that we're unaware of. But let's stick more importantly to the point about the fact that all these thoughts around should we be part of Europe or not be part of Europe, would we be better off if we're out of it, which is obviously what the Greeks are actually thinking. We don't need to necessarily owe a whole load of money to the Germans. Let's just get out of this and pay them back when we feel like it, rather than having to be kept at the mercy of another loan. Where is this going? Are we going to stay in Europe, you think, when we get the vote again? Is it worthwhile hanging on to currency or not be part of a currency? We're in a position where we have sterling. You know?
Well, I think it's a very good decision that was made in the early 2000s that to keep the pound. Of course, we've seen the pressures on the euro over the past decade or so. But look, I think it's a very important question that will be put to the electorate by the end of 2017 in terms of...
And do you think politicians will have a free rein to decide what they want to decide?
Well, look, I think the Prime Minister is going with a very coherent plan, that is to seek a good reform in Europe, to make Europe work. I mean, the EU has become hidebound. It has become dysfunctional. And I think David Cameron has got a very, very good offer on the table for the EU in terms of bringing in real reform, in terms of, well, you know, we're never going to get rid of the free movement of people. I think that's a fundamental core right that the EU is based upon. But surrounding that, I think if we can have reform in terms of social welfare, in terms of if an EU citizen comes into the UK, how long should they have to wait in terms of drawing upon benefits or drawing upon other social services, whether they should be sent back.
This is condemning people as soon as they arrive in the door, isn't it?
Well, no, look, I think the whole fundamental premise...
So it's okay if you're born here and you can't get a job, but it's okay for you to get, your benefits, but if you come into the country to settle and you've got good thoughts in your mind, you're not going to get anything for a while.
It's already the same in many European nations. In places like Croatia, if you cannot prove that you have a proper permanent job offer, that you have health insurance paid for, yet you have a place to live, you can't go. That's an associate EU country. So it's already in place. But look, it's about fairness. If you're born here, if you're a British citizen, then you're born here.
So, Mukesh, is it fair? You know, they think like, you come on the hard times. We never wish that on anyone, but they do, and then they end up, or someone has come in and they got a job for a short period, and suddenly they lose their job, and they're fallen on the hard times, and suddenly they can't get the benefits because they're a genuine case. I mean, there are pros and cons of that situation, aren't there? More of it is the black side of it is actually sorted out.
What we've seen over the past few years is this wholesale change which is having a direct impact on the social strata of this country. And the people who are being impacted the most are at the lower end of the social strata, because we've got this scenario where real need is being slaughtered.
Right.
People who actually need help are being disenfranchised, and they have no comeback because they themselves don't have a champion, right? Other than perhaps organizations who could do some advocacy to say, do you realize that this person who's in a wheelchair, right, is unable to get a job even though they've tried, because employers, no matter what legislation seems to be put in, don't seem to want them because their face or their person doesn't fit. Now, for someone like me, that really hurts. You know, I'm very much against the way some businesses do this. You know, what's to stop someone being able to work?
Well, there's another extreme. We have to move on to another story because we've actually literally only got a few minutes left. We've been going at it, but I had another story to talk about.
What I would add, I think the 2 million people who got jobs in the past 5 years would disagree with Councillor Malhotra.
Okay.
You know, a tax cut for 26 million people in the last 5 years. I think people are the best.
Yeah, but we also need to think about the people who haven't got jobs. Now, interestingly, there was another news item. You actually brought my attention to this as well, about Hackney Council not actually going to enforce this £100 fixed penalty fee on people who are on the streets. And in theory, they could be homeless. Right? Yeah. So they're going to be penalised for being homeless. Is this fair or not?
Well, Savi, look, this is really interesting. You've got 3 topics this evening which are all actually very much related to each other and all come down to the same thing. The Hackney Council situation is about the fact that ordinary people who grew up in an area, who may not have a lot of money, are beginning to feel that they are being driven out from their own neighbourhoods because of the influx of people with money who have professional jobs, who are able to push up house prices. And so you get what's called gentrification. It's happened in Hackney, it's happened in Brixton. Who knows, maybe one day it'll happen in Southall as well. Okay, which is an area I grew up in.
Well, now, this happened in Southall. Where do you think
a lot of money's been spent in Southall?
Hold on. Where do you think are people who came in the 60s, who've set up businesses, who've worked
they're the landlords of today, aren't they? But they're the landlords of today, aren't they?
Your parents, Mayor. My parents are still living off the Broadway in Southall, so maybe that's a class difference.
My parents live in Hounslow, mate. But they've lived there since 1965.
But there's a real issue here, right? The issue is this, is that when you have an economy which is under great stress, like this one, you're going to get a reintroduction of a class system which becomes more and more visible to people, the haves and the have-nots. And so we're getting
have-yots.
Yeah, we're having this tension. People who are, for example, homeless, who may be homeless for whatever reason, they're on the streets and they're being told that if you don't move away from this area, as was happening with Hackney Council, we're going to fine you. How they're going to impose a fine on someone who's got no money, I've got no idea. But the broader question is this, is what is happening to our British society? Some people are doing very well. The Asian community, broadly speaking, is doing reasonably well. Okay, maybe some parts of it are doing better than others. And so the Asian community don't really understand what the argument is about being inside Europe or outside Europe. That's more of a knee-jerk reaction from right-wing politicians who want to create an argument in order to foster more support and power for themselves within the UK by saying that there is outside the UK an alien foreign force they call the Europeans. We are part of Europe. Most Asian people just want to get on with life. They just want to work and earn a living and look after their kids.
And take advantage of the opportunities that are presented to them.
And having said that though, Sabi, look, we are on a small island. There are 60-odd million people living here. The infrastructure of the UK is creaking under the pressure of population. The population is growing rapidly. Our hospitals, our schools can't cope with it. So both Labour and Tories have to have a grown-up conversation about this.
I'm going to have to stop you there because we actually literally run out of time. Well, I would say, not because I can get the last word in, it's the fact there is an argument also that says that obviously there is a lot of land as well that hasn't had work done on it, and I know there have been various political parties that have suggested that construction takes part in that.
And as a good Punjabi, you should be preserving those green fields for your kids.
Absolutely, so they can run around and grow corn.
Yeah.
So thanks so much to my guests. Thank you, Aman, thank you, Joe, and thank you, Mukesh, for joining us. 24 minutes just kind of flies by, doesn't it? I wish we had a bit more time. Maybe we should talk back to the producers and say we need a full hour for these kind of shows. Thanks so much for joining us this week. We look forward to seeing you next time on Waheguru Ji Ka Khalsa, Waheguru Ji Ki Fateh.